while we are going to glide, sway, turn slowly, and boom. Ladies and gentlemen, we all welcome you to the exhibit of the national costume of Miss Universe 2018, Miss Catriona Gray. May I please request everyone to please stand up now for the singing of the national anthem to be led by our MAPE supervisor, Cecil B. Pontoya. This will be followed by the singing of the Legaspi City Hymn.
Silanganan, alak na puso, sakit di mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyan ka ng mag-ibig, sa manlulubi, di ka pasisingil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa dami kong baka. May dilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal, ang istak ng walang at mo'y tagumpay na nagninilig, ang bituin ng araw niyang kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw, dangluan ang ating pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Ang ligaya dapat may mga api, ang mamatay lang dahil sa'yo.
Mga kaimanwa, ang satuyang Legaspi hymn, ang Legaspi ngunyan.
Ini ang istorya kang gikan ko, may Diyos mabut matyaga. Kitang nagbugat sa puon kan mayon, Legaspi urugunan gayon. Siyudad kan sa kong puso, urabon din pagkamuot, ngunyan budaan maabot sa aga, sa aga. Kita gabusan mabilog, kita na may kusog buot, gabos kita Legaspi, Legaspi, Legaspi ngunyan. Rangakan sa diri ang gawian ugali, nasa pagpadaba pag-uswag tagapos, kita ang manwaan na nagkaburupos, yan ang puon kan gabos. Siyudad kan sa kong puso, rabot min pagkamo, ngunyan budaan maabot sa aga, sa aga. Kita gabusan mabilog, kita na may kusog buot, gabos kita Legaspi, Legaspi, Legaspi.
Let us all remain standing for the invocation to be led by our founding curator of the Museo de Legaspi. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Ms. Erlinda Gonzalez Villesa.
Heavenly Father, we are gathered here today with a common desire to know what our own culture is and about us as Bicolano, who is Filipino. It is in knowing the will what we will be able to command and take advantage of our strengths, understand ourselves, enable us to turn apparent limitations into opportunities. Historically, it can be said that the Spanish conquistadores made their first landfall in Luzon, in the Bicol Peninsula, And the Bicols were the first people in the island of Luzon to accept the new Christian religion. The early Bicols had a culture and civilization of their own. They were a people rich, good, and brave. There are many accounts about Magellan's expedition not resolved. Because history should be the unifier of the people, not the dividing factor. Lord, bless the National Quincentennial Committee, Republic of the Philippines, through its lecture series to help us love our own country, awaken and appreciate the heroism and patriotism of the early Filipino freedom fighters, Lapu-lapu, the first local hero. Father in heaven, into your hands we place our path, our direction, our goal. We commit all our plans and programs to you for a successful and memorable quincentennial celebration and how we are linked to the world. This we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you so much. Let's all get seated and relax as we continue with the program. Once again, magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Are you all ready to conquer the universe today? Because if you are, I am also very much ready. Ladies and gentlemen, we all welcome you to the exhibit of the national costume of Miss Universe 2018, Miss Catriona Gay. Well, I can say that today is one of the winning moments of the city of Legaspi by having this exhibit. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are going to look into your program, we have some changes today. We were supposed to have a welcome remarks, an opening remarks by our former city mayor. However, our active and very hands-on mayor has just arrived today. So nevertheless, we would like to acknowledge still the presence of our former city mayor, the beauty queen herself during her time, Miss Geraldine B. Rosal. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for the opening remarks, please help me welcome the Chief Executive Officer of the City Government of Legaspi, Honorable Mayor Noel E. Rosal.
Thank you very much, Bishop Bong Bailon. Palapakan natin si Bishop. This is, as we all know, mga kababayan, today we are live of Radio TV Malacañang. Kaya yung mga posing natin, ayusin natin. Kaya ako nalit, magpaparlor sana ako eh. Kaso wala nang pigaparatext na ako ni Danilo. And of course, with pride, our former councilor and one of the best right now, not only as a party list, but very instrumental to the many programs and many community programs when it comes to calamities. They have been everywhere, especially the recent typhoon Tisoy. Palapakan natin, our pride, Congressman Pido Garbin. Inaayos ko aram mo si Pido, inaanak ko yan, kaya inaayos ko palagi yan. And of course today, we have also a very respected historian, a Bicolano, na talagang marami na ako natutunan sa kanya, kaya hindi pwede na hindi siya kasama. Because I have said, this is history this afternoon as we showcase our fellow Albayana or Albayano who was inspired not only Filipinos but many women and men in the entire world. Nandito po ang ating historian, our very own Dr. Danilo Gerona. Palapakan po na. Joining us also our city administrator, Carlos Ante, the former councilor. And of course, in Legaspi, the many things that we have been doing is in partnership with the Albay Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And of course, we have here no less than the President, Madam Rose Ray Quinto. And of course, other members of the officers. And of course, lahat ng mga paaralan natin na invited natin from the public, private. Hindi ko, ano kaya mag-mention ako? Pero bias ako eh, kasi si Teacher Opel, nandyan yung kuwan ko, nandyan yung, baka magkamali pa ako. Sunshine International School, Baka magkamalin. And nandito ba yung St. Agnes? Invited ba natin? St. Agnes Academy. And of course, from public school. Alam mo ito, mga teachers natin. Sinaga nito ni Darlito. We should not be an alien or hindi natin alam. Alam mo yung mga teachers natin, briefing talaga namin dito. Inikot natin sa museum. Kasi bago tayo mag-imbita, kailangan tayo muna alam natin ang ating mga many historical, heritage, custom, tradition ng ating pagiging Albayano. And of course, nandito rin ang ating idol, Radyo Balagon pa, Radyo Dilata pa, talagang Cho Art Osia. Pero si Cho Art, Bishop, di ko malingawan si Cho Art. So, hang aki pa ako, mahilig ako magsini, ang mga sini ka to, Team Cheter, Lola Cheter, Tadaraga. Ladies and gentlemen, the movie guide on parade. Ang di ko malingawan, so may mga kapay-kapay ni mga reporter, sumaka ato, yan sara Henry Maceda, nadaw ko naga, kaya picture, a movie on parade, now showing. Kaya, makaulog ka dito. Anyway, so, close for renovation ngaya. Pigabuha si Joan. Sabi ba ni Joan, pigarog ba ni Joan? Kaya, now showing, close for renovation. Ano to? Ano? Men at work. And siyempre, ang atin rin, we have also, formerly sa province natin, si, Joe Briones. Joe. And siyempre, hindi natin pwedeng debatiin ang ating curator dito, si Darlito Perez. Yung mga hindi ko ma-mention sa inyo pong lahat, of course, si Madam Belleza, naabot ko yan. Mga antigo natin yan. Alam mo si Madam Belleza, by heart talaga yan. Alam mo kayo nandito yan. Hindi ko nagawa ito sa kanya nung mga unang. Wala pa tayong pera. Ngayon, may pero na tayo. Kaya nga, relic. Okay? So, yung ating mga friends from the media. And of course, my wife, the former mayor, Geraldine, joins us also today, this afternoon. So, sa inyo pong lahat, again, a pleasant afternoon. As I've said, we may not be that too many, but this is very historic, very significant. Because this lady, although it's really very unfortunate that she cannot join us this afternoon, but the show must go on. Alam ko na ang isip ni Madam Catriona, ni Miss Universe, talagang dito. But because she is now an actress, so talagang hindi nahawak niya ang kanyang schedule. But we have to push this because we have really only a limited time before this will now be put on display. Biruin mo, bago ito i-display sa National Museum, pag wala ka dito, pupunta ka na ng Manila. Mag-aeroplano ka o mag-bus ka, matraffic. Dito, 1 month sa atin ito before it will be displayed because this is now a national treasure. No? Kaya nandito si Bishop kasi siyempre be-blessed din ito atin mamaya. So, significant in the sense that alam naman natin na may dugong Albayano si Miss Universe Catriona from UAS. Ako ba taga-UAS man? Tagaligaw pa. Kaya nga. And siyempre, tayo lahat, sabi ko nga, una muna pinagbigyan tayo because, of course, we have now our museum. Considered by many, although biased na naman ako, as one of the best museum in the Philippines, our Legaspi Museum. Siguro hindi naman natin, so mga di pa nakaikot, umikot kayo para makita nyo, makita nyo yung ating, dinisplay din natin dito si Pope John Paul, yung, tama ba bisa, 22nd, nung pumunta siya dito, 1981, elementary pa ako noon, nung pumunta, kaya, nung pumunta siya, tama ba ang computation ko? Elementary pa ba ako noon? Akalis na ba ako noon, 81? So, di ba, lahat naman, mga pangyayari, the heritage, during the Japanese time, during the Spanish time, of course, during the, when this was a part of the Acapulco trade, so you will really learn about the many history of our city. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me as your mayor to lead everyone to showcase the best of us Bicolanas. And of course, itong damit ito mismo ang ginamit ni Miss Catriona during sa, ano nga yan, yung costume, national costume. Trash, di ba? Tama? Kaya baka magkamali ako. Nahilo pa ako, na-delay yung flight ko. Pero napakaganda. So, kailangan talaga, ikuha na natin ito, ubusin na natin because 1 month, then makikita na natin ito doon, of course, sa National Museum sa Manila. So, to everyone, thank you for coming. And thank you for being a part of this. This is about inspiring everyone that nothing is impossible in this world. What is important is that we are united in making history, in making progress, and of course, giving opportunities for our people. Just mabalos. Again, maray na hapon sa inyo.
Thank you so much, Mayor Rosal, for that very heartwarming talk. Hey guys, do you want to be inspired more? Okay. Well, as of this time, I would like to request the presence of our congressman from Ako Bicol. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, he's so dashing. Okay, Honorable Alfredo Garbin Jr.
Thank you, Tim. Not to be accused as redundant, let me also acknowledge those who are present today. Bishop Bailon, of course, in our Constitution, it always says and preferred to be women before men. And so, Madam Geraldine Rosal, our former mayor, and of course, our Mayor Rosal, may ninong, our city administrator, my colleague, and di ko na aram kung anong sanggunian kita, Chito. But we were together for 3 sanggunian, and dahil sa impluensya ni Mayor, we were able to, push Legaspi to higher heights. Our curator, Danilo Perez, our founding curator, not Antigo, but not Antigo. I beg to disagree, Miss Irlinda Gonzalez Villesa. Of course, our historian, Mr. Dr. Danilo Gerona. All the educators who are here today from private and public school. Maray na hapon tabi sa Indogabos, mga kaisudyantehan na presenting ko niyan. And of course, to Art, Ozia, and Manoy Joe, Briones, sa Gabos tabi, Gabos na artist na presenting ko yan na hapon. Maray na hapon po sa Indogabos. Had I know that we will be exhibiting, because I really don't know. Darlito just texted me, can I invite you to share some inspirational message during the opening and of the exhibit in the museum. I was thinking that the items that will be exhibited are painting, sculpture, but had I know that the costume of Ms. Catriona Gray will be exhibited, should have pushed that Catriona Gray should be present this afternoon. Pero sabi ni Mayor, very busy da because Catriona is right now an artist and a singer engaged. Nasa showtime na. But this national costume is really a work of art wherein we can be proud of as Filipinos. And as a work of art, we all know that art has the ability to bring people across all boundaries. In fact, when you speak of art, it also empowers those agencies who are underrepresented in order to create, prepare, and also share their narrative. In fact, this afternoon, we have a work of art that will showcase our collective memory. It's not just paintings. It's not just sculpture, but such as this work of art wherein we as Bicolanos, we showcase our collective memory. This will always or will forever be remembered as worn by our Bicolana who won as Miss Universe. So something that we can be proud of. And siguro, saro pa kung natayaw na ko hindi, it's because Darlito is convincing me that I have to bring here the memorabilia of Eddie Garcia. Me too. You know, I had an initial discussion with the family of Eddie Garcia, Tita Lilibet, his live-in partner. And igwa siyang date na reservation. I was able to talk to her 2 months after the burial of the late Manoy Eddie Garcia. And sabi ko, ang Legaspi would like to give an honor to Manoy Eddie Garcia by bringing in all the memorabilia, exhibiting for our fellow Bicolanos. In Congress, what we've been doing is we're pushing to give Manoy Eddie Garcia a national artist stature. Because as we all know, Manoy, talagang gabos ng role na sa iyang ginampanan sa pelikula. And he wasn't able, day man lamang nagtao kidigta sa iyang pangaran o sa iyang pamilya. All the roles that he have assumed and acted to, leading man, traidor, maging bakla. You know, the last portrayal was awarded as best actor in a premier award body in abroad, wherein di niya na receive dahil nagadana siya. Ang sabi niya sa kuya, bago siya magadan, dahil talagang consistent sa pag-endorse niya sa muya sa panahon kang eleksyon, sabi niya na, Noy, anday ko na sa ngayon na nagampanan, leading lady. And so, I will work hard to bring the memorabilias of Manoy, Eddie Garcia, a great actor, wherein also a pride of the Bicolanos. Let me read to you some of the prepared inspirational message that I have worked into this afternoon. Art influences society by changing opinions, instilling values and translating experiences across space and time. In fact, research and science have shown art affects the fundamental sense of self. The painting, the sculpture, the literature, and other arts are often considered to be the repository of our society's collective memory and records how it felt to exist in particular place at a particular time. And in this sense, art is also a communication. It allows people from different cultures and different times to communicate with each other via images, sounds, and stories, often vehicle towards social change, and it can give voice to the politically and socially disenfranchised. A song, a film, or novel can rouse our emotions in those who encounter and inspiring them to rally for change. So, sa nguya na hapon, tama si Mayor. We really have to take pride, especially those Bicolanos who have bring us the honor not only in the local but in the international scene, such as Catriona Gray.
Just maray na hapon po sa Sendo ka, boss. This is unexpected, so you'll kindly forgive me for groping for words. I've been looking forward to this as soon as I learned from Facebook na si Professor Gerona is coming this afternoon for this talk. I must honestly confess that I did not connect this with Catriona Gray's, costume. I did not know that she was going to be, her dress of course, was going to be displayed. Anaram ko lang. That's because Professor Danny and I had been, encountering each other through the years that I was first bishop of Masbate. I was there for 11 years, and he helped us to appreciate precisely our history, especially in the context of the galleon trade. Tinabangan niya kami na Masbate felt, great about knowing na Bako lang ang Masbate, of course, but the entire Bicol region was part of this important part in the history of the Philippines as we were under the Spanish rule during that time. Anyway, mas na-appreciate itong kultura, itong nakaging panahon. And I think this is what I would like to acknowledge as well, na ang kasaysayan, and I'm sure we will learn a lot from Professor Danny, as the good mayor himself mentioned, na dakul siyang nanodan, siring man ako, and paguna ko, kadakol pang marikitang manunudan sa iya. Manungod lalong-lalo na sa pagsalingoy. Importante ang magsalingoy. Sabi sa tuyang national hero, ang hindi lumingon sa pinanggalingan, kung matinik ay malalim. Masisingkog ka pa, tutudo ka taday ka nagsasaling. Anyway, just joking. Day ka makakabot sa sayo mong padudumanan. And mga paggabos na pangiturugan to everything that we hold, build a peaceful country, to establish communities that are developed and proud. These are all part of who we are, and we appreciate moments like this. Tinatabangan kitang mag-ugma kung sisay kita. Kaya salamat po. I'm very happy to be here. All the best. Diyos maray na hapon po.
Maraming salamat po. Our curator, our very hands-on curator, Mr. Danilo A. Perez Jr., will now present to us now the overview of the exhibit on the National Costume Miss Universe 2018, Miss Catriona Gray.
Dean, thank you very much for always gracing our occasion. To all our dignitaries, young and old alike, Diyos maray na hapon tabi sa Indugabos. I am always overwhelmed by the presence and support that you are giving to Museo de Legaspi. Every time we have a project, an exhibit, you are always here to support the museo. Parakpakan ta po ang satong sadiri sa pagdikti. Very shortly, I would like to tell that our concern this afternoon are of two phases. First, the national costume of Miss Universe Catriona Gray, and the lecture of no less than Dr. Danilo Madrid Gerona. Dr. Gerona's lecture this afternoon is his first lecture after delivering his lecture in Lisbon, Portugal, that is in relation with the 500-year of commemorating the arrival of the Spaniards in the Philippines, but most especially commemorating the victory of the Filipinos, repelling foreign invaders. With regards to the gown of Catriona Gray, exactly this is the very costume that she wore during that very event. It is composed of two phases. First, this costume was based on a Visayan tattoo among warriors. So, can you imagine, this intricate costume is to show the earliest tattoo of Filipino warriors. So, all these shapes were actually to show those tattoo. Because this tattoo is a consideration of the rank of the warrior during the time. And if you may ask, like Bishop asked a while ago, what could be now the link between the lecture of Dr. Gerona and that of the costume of Catriona Gray? It is because the lecture will discuss pre-Hispanic Filipino, a source from Magellan's expedition. And the basis of this Visayan tattoo, it was exactly pre-Spanish. The second phase of the gown of Catriona Gray, is exactly the famous Pampanga parol. It's exactly the famous Pampanga parol. When Catriona competed in Miss Universe, they po ininag-ilaw. They po ininag-ilaw kang time. But of course, with us in the exhibit right now, we can see the lightings of the parol. At the back of this parol, you do not have to miss it, is exactly a painting of the different periods of our history and the several festivals of the Philippines. But most importantly, in the middle of those paintings, you can see Mayon Volcano and Cagsawa. That's how important this national costume is. That's why we have to bring it here in Legaspi, because exactly this is a pride of our region. And persons like her have to be considered for giving honor and glory to the nation and to our region. Now, one of the best stakeholder of the museo are exactly our school teachers. Madam, can you raise tabi? Pwede magtirindog tabi ining mga teachers tango niya na hapon. All schools from elementary until senior high, headed by our supervisor in Araling Panglipunan, Sir Jerry Ramirez. Sir, thank you so much. You will have a bonus this afternoon listening to the lecture. Thank you very much. Listening to the lecture of Dr. Gerona. Not only that, all teachers will be receiving a certificate of attending this series of seminar. The certificate will be coming from the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. That is why you can exactly add this certificate to your ranking. This is of a national level, the seminar that we are having. And we bring it here in Legaspi City. Thank you so much for supporting the museo always. And in closing, allow me to thank our dear partner for this exhibit, no less than the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, headed with museum researcher Jerwel Cruz, sir, and Ayesha Sizing, Historic Sites Development Officer. For the two of you coming over, thank you so much. And as the mayor have mentioned a while ago, we are live radio TV Malacañang with our guys, Mr. James Ugot, Mr. Miguel Vilonia, Mr. Richard Tamayo. Thank you so much for coming over and exactly showcasing what we have here in the museo. And then, hopefully, Ako Bicol will say yes to our request. The title of the exhibit coming May 2, which is the birthday of Manoy Eddie Garcia, will be Manoy at the Museo. So, pag nag-say yes, so Ako Bicol, you will be seeing the memorabilia of a great Bicolano and a future national artist. So we should also take pride of having Manoy exhibited at the Museo. Again, maray na hapon po, salamat po sa Intugabos.
Thank you, Dar. Maraming salamat po. Before we proceed with the introduction of the guest lecturer, and of course the lecture proper, let's have some 5 to 10 minutes break first. Those who would want to learn the Laba Walk will have to contact Mr. Darlito Perez. So who wants to glide, sway? Okay. Okay. Allow me please to read the certification in pagreconciliar. This recognition is given to Dr. Danilo M. Gerona. But I am so sorry, this is too small, I cannot read. Darlito, I cannot read this one, sorry. We want to read.
Before the lecture, we will be giving a Plaque of Appreciation to Professor Dr. Danilo M. Gerona bilang tagapagtaram sa ikaapat na lekturang Quincentennial na may titulong ang ating mga ninuno sa mga batis pang Magellanes na ginibo sa Museo de Legaspi, Siyudad ng Legaspi, Albay. Ang pambansang lupong pang-50-naryong iminukha susog sa pag-implementar ehekutibo numero 55 tanganing ihanda ang nasyon sa pagselebrar kang 500 na taon kang pagpartisipar kang Pilipinas sa pinakainot na paglibot kang tawo sa mundo asin sa trayumpo kang mga Pilipino sa maktan sagkod sa iba pang katakod na pangyari. Pigtaongon yan, ika-15 ning Enero taon 2020. Sign, Dr. Rene R. Escalante, Pangalawang Tagapangulo, National Quincentennial Committee.
So, atin sandali. So, ladies and gentlemen, mga namumutang kong mga kababayan, meron kasi akong official courtesy call, so I cannot join. Kaya ako nagtaon ako kan certificate. Again, thank you very much in advance. I would like to request to everyone so that ilalag tayo ng picture ta so mga heads kang offices, mayaong digdi. Okay? Kindly join us for a picture together with the bishop para kuwang kita para dyan na hapon, bako na kita kuha na. Okay, Bishop, baka sa iba may mga kuhanon pa. Of course, si Madam Rose, mga heads, St. Agnes and Sunshine. Chuart, join us. Maran sa Jo, come on. Baby, join us, come on. Sa DepEd, three representative, DepEd. At least three. From the museum, sir, from the National Historical, sir, can I request you? George, join us. Maran, George. Kaya ka mabagkuhan? Jojo, maran, sabay na. Ining picture na. President. Smile. Thank you very much. Ibigay ko nila.
Maraming salamat po. Can I have that back? Pakibalik na lang po. Magamit na kayo. Once again, may I please request everyone to please find your seats now because we are now going to proceed with our activity. Ladies and gentlemen, for the introduction of the guest lecturer, please help me welcome our City Administrator, Mr. Carlos A. Ante.
Okay, salamat Tabi. Just 3 hours ago, I received this email with an instruction that I will be the one to introduce our guests. When I perused the email, 30 pages. So tinaw sa kuya, which is supposed to be, everything was there. Kaya, first note ko is basically to reprint it, to give it to you as part of your Aralampang Lipunan. Because this is really, sabi natin, a treasure of data. Kung titingnan natin, his books, published and not published, his lectures, everything, ando doon po. Kaya when I try to go over it, sabi ko, saro-saroon ta, it takes me, grabe, So the person that I'm supposed to introduce, nag-create po ako keywords that can describe him. Basically, since kita po mga teachers, I talk of the word the data in the computer parlance. Basically, this person has searched for data, researched for data, everything about the history of Bicol. In this data, he converted into an information that will be given to all of us so that we will be guided kung ano talaga nangyari sa to. This information, again, was converted by him into knowledge. In terms of books he published, in terms of lectures, everything that he did, ando doon po sa iyang mga authored books. And this, should I say, knowledge, at the moment, should be converted into wisdom. Basically, the person who is with us is a person full of wisdom when we talk of our culture. I remember na si Mons Bailon, kasabay ko pamangka tong panahon, and the first thing that when we took up Spanish, sinabi sa Moya, you are supposed to learn Spanish, number one, to know our history. Because history has been written in Spanish. So basically, maugmaon po kami na maski diit, we can understand Spanish. Now, this person, when I say, he is a holder of PhD in Philippine Studies, granted by University of the Philippines. Especially studies in Interinstitutional Field School of Prehistoric Archaeology in Santa Ana Archaeological Project. He took up his college at Ateneo de Manila, AB Philosophy. Basically, yan mga magabaton. Not knowing na kaming dua, pareho man AB Philosophy. Then, high school, UNC, University of Nueva Cáceres, elementary, Kanakman Elementary Schools. So, he is our own. Kasubago, we're talking about memorabilia. I'm talking about him, nasabi niya. Since everybody would want to bring in a sort of memorabilia, I was talking with him, can you not get something for the city that will be our memorabilia of the Ibalong epic? Because in Archivo Franciscano Ibero-Oriental, ando doon yung original, and his research now, practically he stumbled on that particular original writings of this, and he promised us that hopefully when he would be there, we would want to get not only not the original, but at least a duplicate or a copy that will be put in our museum. I think that is a promise, sir. Okay. Parang pagkatatabi na maabot ang oras, epiko na will be with us soon. Now, I don't want to go into his kwan. Sabi natin, honors bestowed on him, napakarami po dahil na kumasaro-saro. Awards given, coming from, not only from local, not only from our country, but international. Then, scholarship and research grants, practically napakarami. Then, affiliations, academic, he's a professor, lecturer, journal referee, researcher, everything is there. Research experience, basically, nag-research po sa Madrid, doon sa Archivo Franciscano Ibero Oriental, Biblioteca Nacional de España, Museo Naval, Real Academia de la Historia, all in Madrid, Spain. Then he went to Archivo General de Indias, Seville, Spain, Archivo del Museo Oriental de Padres Agustinos de Valladolid, in Valladolid, Spain, Archivo General de Simancas, again in Valladolid, Torre de Tombo in Lisbon, Portugal, Archivo General in Seville. So basically po, he had been there where perhaps our roots came from. So this civil is very noted because of the 500 years that they call it the ano yung po digdi? Sevilla 2019-2022. This is supposed to be a date that we will try to commemorate. It is happening na yung pag-welta around the world. Then he is part of this. Not only that, sabi natin, books, gabus po digding, lugar sa Bicol, nagibo na siya kisurat. Kilibro. Kaya I'm informing everybody, if you want to teach or say the history of Masbate, of Legaspi, everyone, especially in Camarines Sur, gabus po duman inadalan may libro, then he has that book. So many. Kung i-mention ko po sa mga lugar, halos gabus po na munisipyo, ginibuan niya na po i-study. Kaya sabi ko nga ni Kuta, this will be your reference if you want to make a research. I don't have to tell you kung sisay siya, just give this for a reprint. Then about the, ano yung digdi? Sorsogon, Iriga, Kamaligan, San Jose, Pili, Ocampo, Bula, Pamplona, Pasakaw, Bacasiris, Malinaw, Malilibot, Bacacay, Bilyar, etc. Nakulunum po, even the city of Legaspi. Sipukot ka naman na buwa. And then everything manugod po sa religious activities. Katong panahon and then sa ngunyan. And then as far as journals, articles in journals, magazines, newspapers, he practically contributed not only in the local but international. In fact, his name has been inscribed in one of the pigiling ko po kasubago in this book. This was published in Sevilla. May nakasurat po digdi, pigluway-luwayan ko i-translate. Sabi digdi, Professor Danilo Gerona in Madrid, renowned historian specializing in the presence of Spaniards in the Philippines, and author of the only work of Magellan's expedition from an Asian approach, comes hand in hand with Federico Mayor Zaragoza, who in turn joined the December in the International Council for the Civil. Professor Dante Gerona in Madrid is the author of the first comprehensive and well-documented work written by a Filipino on Ferdinand Magellan, the Armada of Moluccas, and European discovery of the Filipinas, as translated in Spanish. Professor Gerona has carried out a thorough investigation of several archives in the Philippines, Spain, and other European countries through several original books and monographs on various topics related to the Spanish stay in the Philippines. Currently, he is a member of the History Faculty of the Graduate School of the University of Santa Isabel. Now, if we will talk on this person, data maubos. Kaya siguro, if you want a copy with his permission, I have a copy of his biodata, 30 pages, and if you want to make a research on tobacco, kanakman, especially, Jan, go over that book and then get in touch with them because he is the best source. Mga tugang, they talk of treasures. The person that I'm supposed to introduce to you is basically a treasure to all of us. He is a treasure because of the knowledge which he converted for our wisdom. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome our guest speaker, the pride of Bicolandia, and soon to be the treasure. Perhaps, I'm not saying that you will be displayed also. We have here Danilo Gerona y Madrid of Bicol. Salamat po.
Thank you very much, Sir Ante, for the very, very kind remarks about myself. Of course, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Bishop Bailon. I remember the first time I gave a lecture on Magellan after a few years after I did my doctorate. I was starting to write about Magellan, visiting the archives in Spain, and I was invited by the Augustinian province to give a lecture on the celebration of the birth of Bishop Ordaneta. And I gave a lecture, and I saw a very familiar face in front of me during that lecture in Manila, Bishop Bailon. So I'm very, very grateful to Bishop for supporting the very, very intellectual outlook of our, not only about of our Bicol, appreciation of our Bicol heritage as Catholics, but also of our humanity as Filipinos and as people of the world. So I'm very grateful to Bishop Bailon. Of course, to former Mayor Geraldine Rosal and present Mayor Noel Rosal. To the friends here, we have a lot of people here. Of course, Sir Ante, to Ms. Villesa, Wilson, who has been my friend, and Sir Art, Joe, Ping Peralta, and of course to Lito Tuangki is not here, but I will always acknowledge him as a very good friend. And to a lot of other people here present, faculty members, teachers, the municipal, the city officials. I'm very, very grateful for coming to this event. I was actually invited here last December to give to have this event, but unfortunately I was out then. We were in Europe. I was giving a lecture in Lisbon before the diplomats from various diplomatic communities there, because that's a part of the program of the Philippine Embassy and the consultative body of the President of Portugal. They organized a conference there, and I was among the Filipinos invited to give a talk. Imagine I'm giving a lecture on the history of the Portuguese before the Portuguese. I think the reason is because I did so much work on this, on Magellan. In fact, I've been giving lectures in Spain, and last year I gave a talk at the University of Seville on the Spaniards. So imagine, talk for the Spaniards by a Filipino, in fact by a Bicolano. The reason is because, as I said, I did a lot of work on Magellan, as Bishop Bailon knew, because of the first time I delivered a lecture in Manila. It was more than 10 years ago. I was already working on the documents, imagine, for almost 10 years. I have to do research in the archives of Portugal, of Spain. I have to comb the various archives just to know who Magellan was. And I think after 10 or 15 years of reading Magellan, I virtually knew Magellan like a brother to me. I knew his affairs, I knew his women, I knew his children outside marriage, but I knew how good he was. Magellan is a typical sailor, so let's not condemn him for a certain kind of infractions in terms of his matrimonial affairs, because he was like a typical sailor that we know today, a woman in every port, so to speak. So he's not the typical guy that we had always known in history. He's a human being. I think we have to start from that. He is a human being. And yet, there is one thing I would always appreciate about him. He was a very, very deeply Catholic. And I would say the roots of Christianization of the Philippines could probably, I would attribute it to him. So in a way, that's how I look at him. I virtually knew who he was. And that's probably the reason why it's ironical, modesty aside, Spain had acknowledged my work that last year, in fact, the king invited us, and I was among those invited to meet with him in Valladolid. Yeah. There were about only 50 historians all over the world, and one of them is a Bicolano because from here. And Spain actually published a book, a commemorative book on the 500 years, and they only invited scholars all over the world. They published 20 articles, and I'm the only Asian whom they invited to be part of that, of that paper. So I think with deep pride that I can be a part of that and share from the part of the Filipino people our own experience, our own appreciation of what we are going to celebrate today. So basically, last December, I had a meeting with the Admiral of the Spanish Navy, and they are, just to announce this to you, they are going to bring here to the Philippines the replica of the Victoria. So Spain built a replica of the ship, Victoria. So they are going here, and the Admiral, the staff of the Admiral, we had a meeting at the naval headquarters in Madrid, and they told me to relay to the Philippine government that they are bringing the ship here in 2021, I think March 16, to begin the 500 years. So they would have 2 weeks here, the ship would dock in Manila, and it will go to Cebu 2 weeks after. So you will have a witness of what was the Victoria ship that returned to Spain in 1522. So it's a rare event. Watch that and be present, and probably you can ride in the ship. I think the staff of the Admiral tells me that the Filipinos can get into the ship and see what was it. So that's basically what we have. Now, as I said, I devoted so much of, after my doctorate, I did my doctoral work on the Hispanization of the Bicol region, the Christianization of Bicol. In fact, that's why my doctoral work was spent so much. I spent so much of my time in the Franciscan archives in Madrid. That's why I promised Sir Ante that I'll bring the material on the Ibalon epic, because I saw the original manuscript of Fray Bernardino de Melendreras. I've been there working for almost 10 times in the archives. I combed virtually the documents in the archives. So these were written in Spanish and very, very difficult to read. How much more with the Magellan documents? The Magellan I think that's the reason why very few historians in the world would dare to study Magellan, because one of the difficulty there is how to read the manuscript. They are written in a certain script which looks like Arabic. So you really have to study again. So it's just like beginning an ABC, reading the manuscripts. And most of them, when you touch them, they crumble. So because very, very old, written in 1519, 1517, it's very, very old. So it's very difficult. And you don't only read Spanish, you have to read Portuguese, because some of the documents were written in Portuguese. Portuguese is more of an archaic Spanish. So if you know Spanish, then you bring that a little bit older, then you have Portuguese, so to speak. But anyway, now, what am I going to say here would be about, in a way, how did the Spaniards look at the Filipinos? I would have probably a PowerPoint, but I think it would take so much time to install it. So I'll just deliver this without any graphics. Now, you might probably say, oh, what's the connection of Magellan to Albay? Apparently, there's no connection. Magellan died in Mactan, and so he had not been. But when I was working on the documents of Magellan, I handled a certain document dated 1525. It was written by an eyewitness of the Loaiza expedition. The Loaiza expedition was the next expedition after Magellan. Magellan died in 1521, and then 1525, Spain sent another expedition. This is the Loaiza. And the statement that struck me, and as I said, I nearly dropped the manuscript when I read it, because the crew of the Loaiza asked the people of Cebu and said, where did you get those gold that you have here? And you know, one of the natives of Cebu said, we got that from Albay. Imagine, 1525, there was already Albay. That, in a way, corrected my former understanding of Albay. We always thought that Albay is Spanish. Albay, to the bay. But imagine, there were no Spaniards here in 1525. Yet the word Albay already existed. And what made it interesting is because they identified Albay with gold. Yeah. I don't think the documents could lie. It was a very, very naive response of a native to Spaniards. Where did you get those gold? They said, from Albay. Well, it did not surprise me because when I was working on the documents in 1565, 1567, all these things, I realized that there were so many, many references to the gold mines in Masbate, Catanduanes, and Paracale. Why did Albay figure prominently? Because apparently Albay is the port, is the market, is center of all these mining activities in Bicol Peninsula. Bishop. That's the reason why probably they always associate all these golds flowing into this area as coming from Albay. See, imagine, it changed the whole of our history. Albay was already very, very prominent. And most likely, it was Legaspi that they were referring to because it was the convergence point of all transactions in the Bicol Peninsula as it is the stepping stone for the other parts. When you go to Lagunoy, it would always begin in Sawangan. You will always have to travel in Sawangan. Go to Lagunoy, you go to Catanduanes, you go to the Masbate area, you go to the Visayas, it begins right here. That's probably the reason why eventually in 1869, 1859, they made Legaspi officially an international port in recognition of its historic role in the trading activities not only in Bicol but in the Visayas. But what about Magellan? What about the Filipinos as seen by the crew of Magellan? First, when Magellan traveled, you have to remember, Magellan traveled in 5 ships. And these ships are very, very small. That for me, that's already an interesting thing. Imagine you travel, you cross 2 major oceans in the world with a very, very small ship. For example, the Victoria that returned to Spain, the only one that returned, was only about 18 feet in width and about 60 feet in length. Imagine, 18 feet ang hiwas, 60 pie ang laba, and only about 12 feet from the water level. So imagine you cross the Pacific Ocean with that. It's actually suicide. And yet, they dared travel. You have to consider that that kind of ship, almost like this in length, was actually carrying 45 sailors. 45 sailors with several pigs and I think 2 cows. Imagine, aside from the cargo that they carried. So virtually, it's a very, very small world for them. 5 ships. How many crew in this Armada de Maluku? We don't really know. No historian in the world could establish the exact number. I have read the original documents. You will be surprised because for the last 500 years, we always thought that we don't know anything about Magellan. The only thing that our textbooks would always tell us is Magellan was killed in Mactan, period. Nothing else. But there were so much, when I started reading the documents in Spain, I was so struck by the enormity of documents. Bundles and bundles and bundles of documents. Imagine the food that they were eating. It's there. How many glass of water they have to drink per day? How many oils do they have to receive for the ration? How many olives they have to eat? It's very, very detailed. They gave us the detail of how the salary of the crew, the family background of the crew, what was going on there, how old. Surprising that they were young boys in the expedition, 6 years old. Imagine, they were there in the expedition traveling for 1.5 years. It's one of the longest expeditions that ever left Spain, much, much, much longer than the Columbus expedition. For Columbus, it only took 30 days. For Magellan, it took 1.5 years. Imagine. It's really, that's why I think that the point raised by Bishop Bailon was very, very important. What we are celebrating here is not only our nationhood. We are celebrating the victory, not in Mactan only, but the victory of humanity against all these difficulties, all these sufferings. Okay? They won because there is a certain vision. Okay? And that's what happened. So imagine the terrible ordeal that they have to suffer. Okay? So basically, but we don't really know the exact number of how many crew were there. The only number we have is from about 237, but they were the ones listed because they were listed down because they were receiving salary. But historians of the world failed to understand this. When I was looking at the instructions of Charles V, the king who ordered the expedition, he mentioned there of certain persons who should be joining the expedition. What he calls the desterrados. The desterrados, destierro, exile. They were actually sending prisoners in the expedition. Ano ang role kang mga prisoners? So that when they land in a certain territory that is supposed to be strange, that is supposed to be in a way inhabited by cruel people, it's not the crew that will leave the ship. These were the destierrados. Sila ang enot, the first to fight. So sila ang bait. Because if ever there are cruel people there, it's not the crew that will die. They will die. After all, they were prisoners. That's one thing that no historians in the world had ever examined in the records. So, what's my point per se? Despite the enormous number of crews in the expedition, I was so surprised that only very few of them wrote about Magellan's expedition. That's why when you open your textbooks in Philippine history, the only thing that they would write about Magellan is they arrived here in March 16, 1521, there was baptism, there was mass, and even the mass, even until today, is still quite controversial. In fact, I was one of the member of the panel of 5 historians, which was organized by the National Historical Commission to determine where was the site of the first mass in the Philippines. Because there was a certain controversy. Was it in Limasawa or was it in Masao, which is supposed to be in Butuan? They were eager, they were they were in a hurry to determine the place because there was at one time a certain suggestion that we should invite the Pope for the celebration of the 500 years. So we have to determine which is really the most important place in the celebration of the 500 years for the Catholic Church. So we already made a decision on that. But because we are not supposed to divulge it publicly yet because it's it's the President of the Philippines who should inform it officially to the place that is concerned. But anyway, so I'm so surprised that only very few people wrote about the expedition. Why? I think the reason is this. Many of the members of the expedition were actually illiterate. So contrary to the popular notion that they were sailors, well, they were sailors, but sailing at the time was actually the ultimate occupation of most young men at the time. Okay? So they have to sail because the opportunity lies beyond the sea for them, for the early Europeans at that time. So most of them would go to the others is the so-called ultramar. They would travel. Many of them, as I said, are farmers, ordinary workers, illiterate, those who have no hopes of improving their lives in the mainland continental Europe. It's one thing. There were few of them who were actually educated, who can write. When I look at the documents, they can sign their name. Most of them would only write a cross for their signature. So meaning to say, they could not write. They could not write their signature, their name. But there are few who write their signatures, meaning to say they must be educated. But probably basic education, they can only write. But there were still a small number of the crew who were in a way, who probably obtained a higher education. Some of them were actually have studied astronomy. For example, Andres de San Martin, who was the one supposedly the astronomer of the expedition. And Gines de Mapa, there's another one. But of course, the most famous of all, and I think every young student would know this. We know that somebody who made us aware of what happened in the expedition was Antonio Pigafetta. And the world celebrates the work of Pigafetta because had it not been for Pigafetta, we would not probably know of what happened to Magellan expedition, the most important expedition of the 16th century. But very few knew about him. He is also as enigmatic as any member of the expedition. So, it in a way inspires me to do work on him. So when we were in Europe, I decided to go to his native place, to his birthplace in Vicenza, in Italy, in Milan. That's in Lombard region. Pigafetta is a very, very enigmatic man. I raised this story and this theory to some historians in Europe, and they were so fascinated with the story and said it looks like a Dan Brown story. Because if you look at the biography of Antonio Pigafetta, you won't find anything about him. I went to his native city, and I asked the people there, do you have any biography of him? Even in his native city, there was none. But his house still there, still intact, still there. But then nobody knew who he really was. What made it more enigmatic for me is the fact that when I look at the records in Seville, as to the list of the crew of the expedition, the 237 or 250, there was no Antonio Pigafetta. Imagine, the world had been celebrating the great chronicler of Magellan expedition, but he was not listed in the crew of Magellan. Why? That's already an interesting point, starting point. Well, there was a certain guy there whose name is Antonio Lombardo. Apparently, he was Pigafetta. The question is, why conceal your real name? You are the celebrated historian of the expedition, yet you hide your name. He did not even indicate who his parents were. The name of parents he indicated were not the exact historical name of his parents. Why? The other thing is he accepted a salary, a very, very small salary, a position with a very, very small salary. 1,000 maravedis, whereas Magellan was receiving 50,000 maravedis. He was more educated than Magellan. He was more popular in a way than Magellan. He was more influential than Magellan. Why accepted 1,000 without any position in the expedition? He was not even listed as a crew, nor was given a particular position. The description of Antonio Lombardo in the expedition was, he was a sobresaliente. In the 19th century, a sobresaliente means excellent. But in the 16th century, that's not what it meant. It means alternate. So ang sobresaliente, taga-fill up ka, kung mayo na ng trabaho yung nagadan, ika ang magiging trabahador dyan. So he accepted such kind of position. Why? A little story. When I started checking his background, he was a very, very rich man. His father was among the most educated man in Italy at the time. A writer, a jurist, he has a doctorate. As early as 1470, his father, Matteo Pigafetta, already had a doctorate. And he was a very, very influential man. He wrote a lot of treatises on philosophy, morals. He was a good friend of certain bishops, in fact, connected with certain popes at the time. But why was he enigmatic? The reason is because he was the secretary of a papal nuncio at the time, Francesco Chericate. And Francesco Chericate was sort of a troubleshooter of the Vatican. He was a very influential politically at the time. But why? This is my theory about him, just to connect him with this description of the Philippines. The reason apparently was this. When Magellan made a proposal to King Charles I of Spain, Charles, remember, was a very young man. And Charles was not a Spaniard, contrary to our belief. He was actually Austrian. He was actually Germanic. And remember, in 1500s, Germany was the hotbed of Protestantism and heresies. Apparently, Francesco Chericate was actually suspicions. Was Charles bringing a different faith? Or was it actually aimed at really bringing about Catholicism? So that was something that I had to look at. Probably, this is not to put the church in a bad light. This is to see that how the church at the time was so concerned about the possibility of bringing of heresy and all this. You have to understand that. You have to understand history in its own context. There was the Inquisition at the time. There was the Reconquista at the time. There were the Moors. There was so much problems confronting and probably challenging the established Catholic Church at the time. So, and here comes Pigapetta. Probably he was sent there to see, where are you going? What is the agenda of Charles? So these are actually more theories. Probably subsequent studies would tell me whether there is a certain reality to this. And that, in that context, we will understand how Pigapetta wrote his chronicles of the expedition. You have to understand that Pigapetta was a product of the Renaissance. Renaissance man. A man who put so much emphasis on reason. But Pigapetta, aside from being a man of reason, he was also a man of faith. As I was telling you, he was very close to Bishop Chericate, a papal nuncio. His father was very close to the church. His house was actually built, if you go to Vicenza, his house was located very near the Cathedral of Vicenza. So, he was a deeply devout Catholic. And that's probably why he depicted the Filipinos in his chronicle. There are three things I would like to mention about his writings. First, Pigapetta was so interested with the religion of the Filipinos. So he documented, he was the only, I would say, chronicles from among the few chronicles of the expedition, those who wrote something about the expedition, that devoted so much time on the religion of the Visayans. So he mentioned something about certain rituals for the dead. He mentioned something about how the ancient Visayans worshiped their God. He even inquired whether they were really Muslims. Because today, because of these 500 years, there are people, if you look at the internet, there are people who say, oh, Lapu-lapu was actually Muslim. Apparently, he was not. Apparently, Lapu-lapu was never a Muslim. He was probably an animist who believes in Anito, Bathala, but never a Muslim. There were a number of chronicles that say there were no indications that Lapu-lapu was a Muslim. Okay? So there were mentions there about stories of miracles, how the Filipinos were actually how they accepted Catholicism, the introduction of the Santo Niño. So you see how Pigapetta articulates his abiding faith in the Catholic Church. And so he sees there a certain point. That's why when they were asking them, the natives there of Visayas, do you believe in God? They simply lift their hands, say, Abba. And so Pigapetta was so amazed by that. He found an entry point where the Filipinos and the Catholic belief would probably have a certain link that they believe in God. That's the starting point for the conversion of the Visayans. The other thing is the interest of Pigapetta on power. Pigapetta wrote extensively on the chieftains of the Visayas. He made a very, very detailed description of certain chieftain, how he looked like, how many golds he had in his body, how fat he was, or how small he was. So just that idea that he devoted so much time describing certain chieftains already gave you an idea that here's a man who was so very, very interested on the concept of power among the natives. Again, a product of the Renaissance mind. You have to understand that the Renaissance era was also concerned with the rise of monarchy, the rise of idea of freedom. And here, he reflected that in his writings, its interest. That's the reason why we talk about Lapu-lapu. He would belabor so much this discussion on Lapu-lapu, on Humabon, on the quarrel between the two, just to show that we do not have actually a unified government in the Philippines. And quite surprisingly, one document says that Lapu-lapu and Humabon were actually brothers-in-law. So that's the first time that I probably saw that in the document. They've been so much talk about the quarrel between Humabon and Lapu-lapu. Humabon is the chieftain of Cebu, Lapu-lapu of Mactan, but in reality, they were actually brothers-in-law. And probably one of the reasons for their quarrel had something to do with the sister of Lapu-lapu. It appears that Humabon dropped the sister of Lapu-lapu for a much younger wife. That's probably one reason for the Battle of Mactan would be a family problem. Okay? So, and it also changed our outlook of the, by the way, Lapu-lapu was not the typical guy that we had always known, a young, muscular guy. In my book, I realized from a document from a Portuguese chronicler that Lapu-lapu was about 70 years old when Magellan came. That's why we rule out the possibility of Lapu-lapu killing Magellan directly. It appears that's a myth. So there's no basis for that. The reason why Magellan died, apparently from the chronicles, from another chronicle, is because he was, by the way, fully armored in the Battle of Mactan. He was wearing because I know that from the inventory of armors that they have in the cargo. Magellan had a full armor. So he could not have been killed by hitting other parts of his body except the face and the legs. These are the two vulnerable parts of his body. But why did he die? It's interesting. Then this is where the Portuguese were actually so very, very elated with my talk in Lisbon. Because I said Magellan died for a Portuguese. Why? He was a soldier. Why would he die in that battle? Because according to a chronicler, he lost his sense of reason because he suddenly rushed to a young man being ganged up by the natives of Mactan. The young man was a Portuguese. And the Portuguese, Cristobal Rebelo, was actually his bastard son. See? Yeah, he was bastard son. Yeah, that's another thing. It's so bastardo. So basically, he died for a Portuguese. And he died as a Portuguese. So we know that from other chronicles. Pigapetta did not mention about these things. But Pigapetta, as I said, was very, very keen on describing the power relations among the native chieftains at that time. So this concern on power. The other things, of course, is on environment. Pigapetta wrote about the environment because of their implication on commerce. You have to understand that Magellan did not intend to go to the Philippines. His interest was to go to the Spice Islands, the Moluccas. Did Magellan know about that? Yes. In fact, it is again another document that most historians did not read. Magellan actually was presented a letter to King Charles several weeks before he left for the expedition. He told Charles, "Sir, there are 6 islands in the Especeria. I am telling you this because if ever I die, you have something to show to the Portuguese that that territory belonged to Spain, not to Portugal." So he knew where he was going to. The destination was the Spice Islands, now Indonesia. Why? How did Magellan know about this? Again, contrary to popular belief, Magellan was already in Asia as early as 1510. He was already based in Malacca, which is now Malaysia or Singapore. And it appears that Magellan must have talked to a number of Filipinos there. Why? Because there was a small community there in Malacca, and they are called Luzones by the Portuguese. People from Luzon. Apparently, Magellan heard about them and started talking about them. And there was a certain suspicion by one Spanish royal chronicler, Argensola. Argensola said that Magellan, in fact, traveled to the Spice Islands from Malacca and probably reached the Philippines as early as 1510. So he knew the Philippines long before he landed here. But then, he does not really know because he was traveling towards the east. This time he was traveling to the west. So he did not really know where the Philippines was. So in that particular case, he was not interested probably in going to the Philippines, but they were interested in going to the Spice Islands. Why? Because of the spices. But again, contrary to popular belief that, grabe naman ngaya, para lang ngayon mag-spices, mapadara ka ng expedition, magastos ka ng millions, and you will sacrifice the lives. You don't understand, most people did not understand the value of spices at that time. Spices, baka intindi ito, spices nakakapasiram sa luto. Actually, in the 16th century, that's not the main purpose. What's the purpose of spices? Why do you have to sacrifice lives? Because he who controls spices controls the world. How can that be? The reason is this. The fundamental purpose, the use of spices is preservation. You preserve food. So, if you want to travel far, you must preserve your food. If you can travel far, you can discover more lands. You discover more lands, you occupy more lands, you conquer them, you have more territories in your control. That is the reason why they invested on spices. No refrigeration system, you make use of salt, you make use of ginger, you make use of spices because you control your travel time, you control the world. That's the reason why, in a way, Pigafetta was interested on these particular features of native society. So I won't be discussing more because panamit lang po to sa kasaysayan. But I shared with you a little information, but it took years to gather them, synthesize them. So thank you very much po.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gerona. Before we end this activity, we shall be having an open forum. But before that, sige, let's find our seats first. Who would want to join the open forum? Meron po tayong mechanics dito sa open forum. You have to do the lava walk from there to here. Joke lang po. Anyway, may I please request another microphone? If you don't have any, maybe we can utilize this one. Dr. Gerona, we shall be having an open forum. Maybe we have some few questions to ask. Okay, sir? Lapit na lang ako sa iyo, sir.
Dr. Gerona, sino po si Enrique de Malaca or Henry the Black?
Anyway, did you hear what I'm saying? So basically, we always thought that Enrique was a Filipino. That's not actually true. As I said, in the last will and testament of Magellan, he says there that actually Enrique was from Malacca. Enrique, that's why he called Enrique de Malacca. Magellan got him when he was about 17 years old, about 1512, and as a prisoner, because the Portuguese actually conquered Malacca, and apparently Enrique was among the warriors there. So at the time, if you are caught, if you became a captive, then you become a slave. And Magellan made him a slave for some time. And because Enrique was brought to Portugal, Enrique knew Portuguese. And when Magellan shifted his allegiance in 1517, he went to Spain, Enrique apparently knew Spanish. But how come that Enrique could communicate with the natives of Cebu when he was a Malacan? You have to understand that language at the time was fluid. And Malacca was sort of the Hong Kong of today. So many Filipinos would go there, and probably because of that, the language was very fluid, and therefore they could understand each other very well. So this idea that Enrique was a Filipino is only a product of a national bigotry, so to speak. We wanted to show that, oh, we are great, but we are historians. I think as a historian, well, I have to first put more faith on truth and the historical validity rather than on our certain commitment to our national identity. Of course, we have to produce a truthful history. And I think that should be the concern. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sa nabasa ko kasi sa account ni Pigafetta, I mean, other sources, parang nabili ni Magellan si Henrique sa isang Filipino community sa Malacca, slaves. Kasi uso nung araw yung mga slaves na kinukuha from Luzon or Visayas. Na sa mga trading posts, binibenta sa Borneo, and then sa Sumatra, and then finally sa Malacca. So during that time, mayroong 500 Filipino communities sa Malacca. At doon na yata nabili ni Magellan si Henrique, who was only 10 years old. And he was brought to Spain, Portugal, and then Spain.
Yeah, but I think the way I look at it, it was probably more 17 years old, and probably was a warrior at the time. He could have been bought. That's a possibility. But there was no document. It's more of a speculation. But I think the document, the testamento says there that he was a esclavo, and more probably based on the age that he obtained him and the conditions from where he obtained him. Apparently, he was a captive. He was a captive of the Portuguese. Because as I said, that's the tradition of the Portuguese at the time. If you are a warrior and you are caught by them, then they can enslave you. In the Philippines, they also implemented that idea of slavery. At the time, if you don't want to accept baptism and you are caught by the Spaniards, then you can be enslaved for 10 years. So, although the king of both countries, because they are the so-called the Catholic kings, they do not actually sanction in slavery, but it was actually implicitly being practiced. And I think Enrique was more upset. Well, we don't really know the idea about 10,000 or 5,000. I think it's a big number, sir, at the time. I think if ever there were Filipinos, definitely there were Filipinos in Malacca, but I suspect there was actually quite smaller in number. Because the reason is a certain Tome Perez, a Portuguese chronicler, mentioned that there was a small community there. So very, very clear, it was a small community. Kaya kuminsan, masakit magtubod kita sa mga minsan nasa internet na yan. These are sometimes, kuminsan, opinions and speculations. As historians, we always rely on evidence. And meaning to say, evidence, primary document, eyewitness accounts. So, there's a certain science of history.
Thank you so much. Another question, please.
Sir, you mentioned earlier that Magellan knew about the Philippines as early as 1510.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Could it be that he was interested in the Philippines because of the gold? Because it was also known as illustrated in the Baxter Codex, that pre-Spanish Filipinos were actually wearing tons of gold jewelry, including the alipin. So could it be that when they met the Luzonas, they were actually garbed in all this resplendent jewelry? That's why the very thing that they were interested in was really the gold, not much of the spices.
Yeah, but apparently Magellan did not have a very, very concrete notions of the Philippines. He must have, that's speculation on the part of Argenzola, that Magellan must have traveled to the Philippines as early as 1510. As I said, that's the speculation of a royal chronicler. But did he have any really concrete descriptions of the Philippines? To me, it's still questionable. But there was one thing concrete about what Magellan experienced when he was in Cebu. A certain chronicler by the name of Gines de Mapra said that Magellan apparently communicated to him that he was already fascinated with Cebu and he intends to stay in Cebu and no longer proceed to the Spice Islands. Why? In the contract between Charles and Magellan, the contract says this way: beyond 6 islands that Magellan, 2 of them could belong to him. And it says that Magellan was interested in claiming Cebu for him because he was so fascinated with the people of Cebu, the treasures of Cebu. So this probably, it includes the idea of gold. But that's, I think these are only purely on the level of speculations. We do not have hard data on this. I don't want to broker certain kind of opinions because it might be misconstrued as historical facts. Yes.
Okay, before we proceed with our open forum, a person will be given a chance to ask one question only. Sino pa po? Okay, sir.
Good afternoon, Prof. My question lang po, if I'm really interested in the local history, can you recommend archives to visit in Spain, in the Vatican? Because I'm very interested in the history of Bakakay, and there are a lot, when I'm looking at some of the materials that is already available, there are a lot of gaps. It generated so many questions than answers. So now I contacted Franciscan archives here in the Philippines, but they cannot find any. So maybe can you recommend an archive, a library in Europe where we can go to search at the very local level because we don't have those material?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question especially for teachers and researchers. I did much of my work for my dissertation in Spain. So basically, to start with, because I did not work on Magellan. Magellan is a second work for me. My initial dissertation was on the conversion, the hermeneutics of power, so to speak. So what I did, I had to read the Doctrina Christiana, the sermons, all those things. So the first archives that I spent much of my time was in the Archivo Franciscano Ibero-Oriental. Bicol region was mainly a Franciscan mission. So I did much of my work in the Franciscan, and so much documents there. You will be surprised. So much so, even the poem of Father Bernardino de Menendez, the Ibalon epic, was there in his original handwriting. So basically, we started with that. The other thing is you have to go to the Valladolid, the Archivo, the Padres Agostinos de Filipinas, the APAP. The Augustinian, the first missionaries who came to the Philippines were the Augustinians, 1565. But they were also the first to evangelize Bicol region. That's why when they celebrated the 450th Christianization of Luzon, we started it in Sorsogon. And I got a document about Fray Alonso Jimenez. And quite surprisingly, Alonso Jimenez apparently was the first prior who had a story of miracle in the Christianization of Luzon. When he Christianized the people of Sorsogon, of Magallanes, of Ibalon, it is said that the people there accepted Christianity because he brought back to life the chieftain of Sorsogon. This is documented from the archives of Seville. So basically, of the Valladolid records of the Augustinians, very interesting. So because this is also the earlier evangelizers were Augustinians in Bicol, so you should go to the records of the Augustinians in Valladolid. Then you go to the Archivo General de Indias. Again, I spent so much work in the Archivo General de Indias. The Archivo General de Indias is the repository of the Spanish Empire's documents, everything. In fact, when I was starting to work on my dissertation, I spent my Archivo General de Indias was in Seville. I spent the whole summer from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon just reading documents as thick as that. See? On the evangelization of the Philippines. At the time, they call it the Sección Ecclesiastica. Ecclesiastical documents, appointment of bishops, appointment of missionaries, it's all there. Although some of them are already placed in the internet, there are still so many documents that are kept there. For example, the Episcopal Visitation Reports. I think what is of interest for you would be to look at the Episcopal Visitation Reports. The Episcopal Visitation Reports is the bishop goes to this town, talks about the people, wrote about the life of the people there, the status of the prior there, all these things. Very interesting material. And there are so many. The Biblioteca Nacional de España, when the eruption of Taal took place, went back to my document. I saw a document there about 1754 eruption, mentioning what happened to Taal during that 1754 eruption. From 25,000 population, it went down to 12,000. So that's the only thing we know. So many say so many people either died or they left the town or the area there. So history has so much information to tell us, and these are some of the materials, okay, that I can share with you. Okay,
Okay, another question po.
Yeah, Joe.
My question will be related to the costume of Catriona Gray. Huh?
Yeah.
You mentioned that this is the national costume worn by Catriona Gray, and it represents the tattoos of the Filipinos. So do you mean to say that when in 1521, when Magellan landed in the Philippines, he saw that, or the Spaniards saw that the Filipinos were all tattooed?
Yeah.
Was the tattoo exclusively for the males, or all the women, also Filipinas, were also tattooed? And what is the meaning? Why was the Filipinos during that time so interested to have tattoos on their bodies?
Very good, Joe. Ngunyan pong panahon, pag tatuan ka, isipon kaya, hali nga dyan bakasyonista nga, hali nga sa munti. Pero kaitong panahon po, pag tatuan ka, I believe na believe sinda. Both men and women place tattoo on their body. In fact, iniyong tatong iniyo, actually, no Magellan chronicle ever described the tattoo that they have. They mentioned there were tattoo. But how did the tattoo look like? The tattoo of Catriona Gray's attire or costume was actually derived from the Boxer Codex. If you are interested to see pictures of the Filipinos, they are in color. So a certain writer in 1595 drew the Filipinos in color, and they drew them with tattoo. The Visayans, they call them Los Pintados. And by the way, in the early period of evangelization, as late as 1600s, kitang mga Bicolano, dahil mga tinapon na Bicolano. You know how the documents refer to us? They refer to us as Bisaya. Kitang mga Bicolano, apun sa to Bisaya, lalo na di southern part kang Bicol. Because apparently, the early Bicolanos were wearing tattoo like the Bisayans. Okay. And yung design na ini sa costume ni Catriona Gray is actually patterned from the Boxer Codex. So, the Boxer Codex, I said, is a document of a known author, but it contains very interesting pictures, not photographs, but actually drawings of ancient Filipinos with their tattoos. So nagtatattoo sinda ka itong panahon. Ano ang sense nila ka itong kang tattoo? Tattoo at that time is not only for decoration. It's actually a social emblem. Meaning to say, if you have more tattoos, you are belonging to the higher status of the society. Yeah, especially sa mga warriors. Ang talagang grabe ka itong tattoo, basically ang mga lalaking mga warriors. But women also put their tattoo. It's not explained why women also made their tattoos. But there were records that say that women also put their tattoo. And that's apparently widespread in the pre-colonial Philippines. So,
Okay,
yan.
thank you. Another question, please.
May I just sit down? Following through your but no, seriously. Following through your lecture, especially between Lapu-lapu and Magellan, is there a possibility that Lapu-lapu was the one who really killed Magellan?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think it's a very, very controversial one until today. In the internet, still rage that issue there, that could it be possible that Lapu-lapu killed? In a way, possible, yes. Why? The idea is apparently Magellan was struck here on the neck and on the legs. But it did not really say that he died because of these blows. The possibility that Lapu-lapu could have killed him is this, because it's an ancient ritual in the Philippines that the head of the warriors, the chieftain, is generally given the privilege to give the mortal blow to the... It appears to me that Lapu-lapu must have killed Magellan, if Magellan was still alive, by beheading. It's a ritual at the time that if there is a certain enemy who displayed tremendous bravery, the Visayans would call that, they have a term for that, I think kagin or what, there's a certain Visayan word which they associate a brave man. And one of these things, they call it dagin. One of the rituals they perform to this vanquished brave person is to cut his head and put that on a stake as a display to the public. Did Magellan die in the hands of Lapu-lapu in this way? Possible. Possible that Lapu-lapu gave the coup de grace, the death blow to Magellan and cut his head. A sequel to that in 1970, accidentally they found a skull in a place believed to be where Magellan died. And the skull was transfixed in a rusty metal, believed to have been a spear. So the question is, could that be Magellan's head? Because they did not recover the body of Magellan. There was an attempt on the part of the Spaniards to locate where Magellan was buried. In 1833, when they started putting a monument in Mactan, the bishop actually of Cebu at that time was the one who initiated the effort of putting a monument to Magellan. So the first thing that they did is, let's see where he died or where he was buried. That's the appropriate place to build a monument. So they did a research. They interviewed the old people of Mactan. They went to the archives of the Augustinians, but they could not locate any document. So there was, when I was working on my research in Spain, I went to the Archivo Franciscano and I found a newspaper, El Oriente, 1875. There was a drawing there of supposedly a tomb of Magellan. There's a nipa hat on top of it, and it says, this was the tomb of the great Hernando de Magallanes. We don't really know how true was that. But there was the tradition that they found the tomb. And probably it's the place where the skull could have been found. So one thing certain, Magellan could have been beheaded. And it could have been Lapu-lapu who did it as an honor to this great enemy of him.
That is really sad. Another question, please, from the back. Meron po dito. Oh, yes, ma'am. Okay, please invite you here.
Good afternoon, Doc Dan. I don't intend to preempt the public announcement with regard to the first Mass, the site of the first Mass, but in the new general education curriculum, Module 3 is on the controversial issues in Philippine history, and the first topic is on the site of the first Mass. So while waiting for the public announcement, kindly may we ask for some tips on how we would handle the questions that will be raised by college students. Thank you.
So anyway, the decision was this, and I think it's also going to be public already. That decision is we upheld the traditional site of the first Mass in Limasawa. But there's a certain controversy when we're still deciding on that, because after my lecture in Seville, in the University of Seville, somebody handed to me a book, supposedly the diary of Magellan, the lost diary of Magellan. There were rumors about Magellan writing a certain account. As early as 1792, a certain researcher, Martin Fernandez Navarrete, became famous as the bibliographer of Magellan, found in a certain chapel, a certain, monastery, San Isidro in Spain, supposedly a diary of Magellan. So I tried to follow that up because if you are a scholar, a researcher, you not ignore leads. So I have to look at them. And I found a certain supposedly work of Magellan in the Biblioteca Nacional. I could have shown this, the manuscript there. And it's supposedly, it was authored by Ferdinand Magellan. But when I examined the manuscript, I am convinced it was not Magellan. It was actually a forged document. So in history, there are so many forgeries. So that's one of the rule for a historian. You must be able to identify which is forged and which is real. So that's one thing. I ruled that out. It's not Magellan. But the diary. The diary is controversial. So when the National Historical Commission convened us historians, 5 of us, and I mentioned this diary, there was one Spanish historian, the head of the Instituto de Cervantes, who said, oh, that's a forgery. It's actually a fiction. So, okay, I did not discuss that anymore because it's supposedly a fiction. But when Spain asked me for an article, I submitted an article because of the commemorative book that they published. I sent an article. And you know, in Spain, the Europeans are very, very meticulous. Scholars there really will tear you apart. You cannot just, di ka pwede magbula-bula naman ka mga article mo, talagang binabasa yan. And it took them 1 year to edit our manuscripts before they said, okay, we will publish your manuscript or not. So, but before that, they sent a communication to me. They said, oh, you cited this document, the Diary of Magellan. The editors, the Spanish historians in Spain, we convened them and said, we will not publish your article because you cited this document, this Diary of Magellan. The consensus of the Spanish historians is it is actually fake, unless you can persuade us that this is true, then we won't include your article. I was not the one who presented. They were the ones who asked me, but that's how strict they were. So I have to read the documents that I am familiar with and read the diary, word for word. And I told them, I am 110% it's Magellan. Because there are many things that happen which existing documents could not explain, but only the diary explained. So they published the article. But what is in the diary? In the Magellan diary, it says that the first Mass was not in Limasawa, but it was in Humonhon. I think, in a way, first island they landed. It's more logical. Yeah, it's more logical. In fact, when I was writing the book, I had to consult a certain document in Spain known as the Consolado del Mare or Consolado del Mar. So, if you're a historian, you don't only concentrate on facts, you have to look at the logic of the times. So the Consolado del Mar actually is a kind of a law that governed all activities in the ships, including the celebration of Mass. And in this Consolado del Mar says that you cannot celebrate Mass while you are sailing on the ship. The reason? Because the consecrated host and the consecrated wine bishop might spill over. So, dapat, you can only celebrate Mass if you are sure that the ship is not going to move and would not tip off the chalice. Okay? So, most logical, they could celebrate Mass only on the first land that they went. And that could be Humonhon.
Thank you so much. Dito na muna. Tayo lang. Sir, okay. Last question from the back. The author is getting interesting. Very interesting.
Good afternoon.
Hi, July.
Ano yan?
July.
Ang hapot ko, manungod kan problema ko sa Sorsogon. Kasi they had a play na about yung first Mass. And I was the one who wrote the script for their celebration in Gibalong. So, ang nagka-problema ako duman, sabi ninda, baguhon mo ngayon July, bako nang yung first Mass in Luzon. Taigong nagka-claim somewhere in the Central Luzon, na sino nagka-claim. Sabi ko, paano man mangyari iyan? Ha? Bago ka makaduman sa interior, di ka nga sa Gibalong. Kaya lang, dumando sa pag-meeting nino, dahil paano naka-attend ako ang mga meetings, nagluluwas na ito pala ang, di na daw paggamit nun itong first mass in Luzon sa Gibalong. Kasi yun ang pag-claim ng Magallanes. Kaya gusto ko ma-clarify, ano pa talaga yan na first mass in Gibalong sa Magallanes? Ano ba, totoo ba yan? Or kiniklaim talaga ng ibang lugar?
Yeah, salamat, Jules. Actually, the first mass in Luzon is the most documented. First mass in Magallanes, the first mass in Luzon as very, very well documented event. The one that Jules is actually mentioning about the first mass, another place in Luzon, was that mass in Pangasinan, where about 1300s or 1216, a certain Franciscan friar by the name of Fray Odoric de Perdidone, an Italian Franciscan friar, who was supposedly en route to China. He passed through Java, en route to China, but a storm struck their ship, so he had to seek refuge in a certain cove in Pampanga, or Pangasinan. And they said that he celebrated Mass there. But you have to understand that toponyms, the names of places at that time, is very, very difficult to identify at present. Whether he really landed in Pangasinan is a different question. Whether Mass was celebrated there and they celebrated Mass in that specific place is again a very, very difficult claim to establish without question. So the only place which there would be no question, very, very clear in the document, is the Mass in Ibalon. So that's why the National Historical Commission apparently recognized the Mass in Ibalon as the first, so to speak, with all the evidence.
So much to learn from Dr. Gerona. I am so sorry to end this forum with a final question coming from Sir. Final question na po. Mamaya, after this, maybe you can just make kalabit to Dr. Gerona for a one-on-one session. That would be better.
This is the last question.
Ason.
Is Sebastian Elcano, Doc, is a part of Magellan expedition? Is Sebastian Elcano was a part of Magellan expedition?
Yeah, very good question, Son. Actually, during my lecture in Lisbon, when the people in Guitaria learned that I was going to Spain, they invited me. Guitaria is the birthplace of Sebastian Elcano. There was a historian there who knew of my work. In fact, when I opened his book, he gave me the book. My name was there. The book was already mentioned there. That he said, I read your book very, very well. It's a very good book. He's now the world's recognized authority on Sebastian Elcano. And when I went there, we had a meeting, and he says they are interested to meet me as a historian because they said Elcano is always marginalized. Vis-a-vis Magellan. Magellan is always the prominent leader, and Elcano is always considered as a small figure. But they said Elcano is the one who completed the expedition. Without Elcano, there would have been no circumnavigation of the world. I say, well, yes, that's true. But you have to understand that Elcano also was among the leaders of the mutiny, which nearly ended the expedition. So, kaya medyo marginal si ano. Kaya lang, you have to understand, ngunyan sa Europe, ang politika nabuhay giraray kaning 500 years. The politics between Portugal and Spain. The reason is because ang Spain is very, very eager in also promoting Elcano because Magellan is Portuguese. So kaya nga ni ang gusto interesadong maraisinda na ang mga Portuguese man habo sa mga Spaniards. Kaya nga ni gustong maraininda si Magellan. So basically, sinasabi nila, mga Spaniards kaya, you killed our son. Okay? Magellan. So kaya habunin na kayo. Kaya until today, buhay na buhay pa yan, event pong iyan sa Europe. Thank you very much.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause to our historian, Dr. Danilo M. Gerona. Thank you so much. Okay, after this, we are going to proceed with the tour of the exhibit. However, we have some few announcements to make. Please do not use any flash if you want your photo ops here, please.
Those who would like to take photo with the gown, you may not use your flash. We will allow you to take photo o mag-selfie ka mo. Dahil lang nindo pagsulogon sa gown or alion sa manikin tabi. we will give to Sir the certificate coming from the National Historical, Parakpakan Tagiraray, so National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and our friends from RTBM, and all our guests na nagdigdi. Again, thank you very much. See you soon. We will be making again another project and we will be inviting you again. Thank you again. Thank you very much.